I think as soon as that job opened up, everybody realized that Tim Miles was somebody that Nebraska would take a look at. They don't know, given what he's done here and the fact that 4 of his top players are kids from Nebraska, so he obviously knows how to recruit the state. But at the same time, I think his athletic director says nobody's asked for permission to talk to him yet about either that job or the Illinois job, where Tim Miles' name's also popped up through a few different people. And so at this point, I think it's one of these things that, he's had some success here, so you sort of expect it, that his name's going to come up with certain jobs, and those, both the Nebraska and Illinois job, would seem to fit. He's a guy who is from the Dakotas. He's got Big Ten connections. He's recruited a lot of the same areas those schools are going to be recruiting. So certainly his name's going to pop up. As to how serious any of that talk is, it's hard to say, because Tim keeps everything pretty close to the vest when it comes to these things. I know he has interviewed. The statement he gave me yesterday, I'm thankful and happy with the job I have. If there's ever anything to announce about another job or my current job, that's when we'll announce it. That's identical to what he's told me the last 2 years, when I know he has had some interest and some feelers from schools as well. So it's hard because of that to know how serious the interest might be, but we'll see.
Yeah, you've mentioned his work in the Dakotas and in Minnesota. I mean, the programs he has coached so far: Mayville State in North Dakota, Southwest Minnesota State, North Dakota State, and now Colorado State. He's a Dolan, South Dakota native. And you've mentioned the 4 Nebraskans he's talked to, but the knock on him, if you compare it to other guys who are supposedly in the mix, and it's been a very secretive process, so this is all based off of reporters' sources. Rob Jeter at Wisconsin, Milwaukee, he's coached at Wisconsin. And Brian Gregory at Georgia Tech, he's coached at Michigan State as an assistant coach. Big Ten recruiting ties. Same for John Gross at Ohio, who's been at Ohio State. Tim Miles, they say, this is nice. He's kind of from the upper Midwest, and he's coaching at Colorado State, but will he and would he recruit the Big Ten? You've said he has Big Ten connections. What are those?
It's more a matter of he's familiar with that part of the country. He has recruited Minneapolis. Certainly, he's gotten guys from that area. He's recruited kids. He's got guys from Nebraska. He's got players from that area. He's got recruited a player out of Chicago this year. So he's got some connections there. He doesn't have experience having been on a Big Ten staff, but I think he's got a lot of friends in coaching and people that he's worked with over the years who've been in and out of different Big Ten programs. So I don't think that would be a huge deficit for him to try to overcome should he choose to take one of these jobs. At the same time, he does not have that immediate familiarity as these other guys have that you just pointed out, and that would be a little bit of a knock against him. And, as great as people think with the job he's done at Colorado State, it has been 5 years to get to a fourth-place team in the Mountain West Conference, or 4 years. They got to fourth place last year, and 5 years to get to an NCAA tournament berth. Granted, the program was in pretty bad shape when he came in, but I don't think most Big Ten schools would have the patience to take 5 years to get to make that kind of jump.
Yeah, well, Nebraska's gone through a 14-year NCAA tournament drought, but people understand the first 2 years are probably going to be rough. The cupboard's going to be bare, and that's supposedly what he had at Colorado State. We're learning more about Tim Miles, the Golden Ram head coach, as he is a possible Nebraska ball candidate. This is Gaskins and Stevens, 93.7 The Ticket in Lincoln, theticketfm.com. We're talking with Kelly Lyle of the Fort Collins Coloradoan and Josh Harvey from Big Red Report magazine, BigRedReport.com, filling in for Tom Stevens today.
Hey, Kelly, I'm just wondering, you just mentioned that Colorado State was in a pretty bad situation when he came in, and I'm reading 7 of the 9 players he inherited that first year left the program. So, I mean, kind of what was it? What caused those players to leave the program at that point? And then just give us a picture of how bad it really was.
Well, there was a lot of dissension. A lot of those guys actually left the program even before Dale Layer, his predecessor, was fired. I think 3 of those players I knew by the time the Mountain West Conference tournament was over, well before Dale Layer was fired, that they were moving on. They made it pretty clear, just talking to them and their families out in Las Vegas during the conference tournament. And then they had further turmoil here in that a couple of the players that were left behind, one of them actually pulled out a gun and shot at a sofa the other one was sitting on. So they had some serious turmoil within the program when he arrived. The 2 players that technically were still on the roster when he showed up were both 7-foot centers. So even though there's 2 of them, you're not going to play them at the same time. And one of them was a center who had rarely, if ever, played. The other was Stuart Creason, who ended up being a pretty serviceable center for Colorado State when he wasn't injured over the next couple of, for that final year. But he did really have to start over. I mean, Jesse Carr, who's currently a junior out of, and he's from Nebraska, Ainsworth, he came in as a true freshman, and he was already possibly the team's best player in his very first year on campus. And because he had a redshirt year along the way for a hip injury, he actually came in with Miles' second season when they went 9-22. But he was their best player, and he was the youngest guy on the team.
Now, Colorado State has had some success in basketball. It sounded like the coach before Tim got fired. But before that, correct me if I'm wrong, Stu Morrill did pretty well there. I mean, what kind of basketball tradition does Colorado State have? What kind of a place is Fort Collins, at least within its league, to recruit to for basketball traditionally over the years?
It's been kind of off and on. As well as Stu Morrill did here, he won 20 games all the time. But at the same time, people were not all that sorry to see him leave for Utah State. They played kind of a slow, methodical brand of basketball, and fans didn't really flock to the arena. Attendance was dropping every single year. They didn't make NCAA tournaments under him. They made NIT. They made the NIT every once in a while, and so there was a little disappointment in that. And then there was Richie McKay actually came in for 2 years, and they took him to an NIT in one of those 2 years where they actually made it. They were one game away from getting to the NIT semifinals, so they made it to the quarterfinals. But again, they had not had real basketball tradition at Colorado State since Boyd Grant, who was coaching in the late 80s into 1990. He took them into back-to-back NCAA berths in 89 and 90, both as an at-large team. And back then, they were selling out games. Students were actually camping in line to get their tickets, things like that. And they haven't really had that kind of tradition since then. That's what Tim Miles has kind of rekindled a little bit of that feeling in the past 2 years. As they've started selling out games, people have gotten excited about the program. They're playing a kind of basketball that fans like to watch. You can watch the team and know that they're playing their hearts out. They're giving everything they've got. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And Stu Morrill never really had that. I didn't cover the team then, but my understanding was, the way they played was just not exciting basketball for a fan. It was effective. They won a lot of games, but it wasn't something that really engaged the fans.
And that was going to be my next question. Doc Sadler played this slow type of boring basketball, and I think a lot of people got down on him even more because of that, because not only were they losing, but they weren't entertaining. And you mentioned that Tim Miles' basketball teams, they play entertaining basketball. What is it about it? Are they a high press team? Are they high in transition, or is it one of those things where those players are just selling out and you can really tell they're giving their complete 100% effort?
It's a little bit of everything. Certainly there are teams that play faster. Probably the thing that sold people on the most this year is just their team play. They were very good at sharing the ball, really, and that really started more last year too, where they were really good at moving the ball around. They could have their leading scorer shut down and still win games because there were enough other guys that could step up and fill the void. They had players that, on defense, one in particular, Pierce Horning, a junior forward who anybody who watched their NCAA tournament game against Murray State would attest to. He played so far above what you would think a 6'5" forward could do as far as grabbing rebounds, and he had 11 rebounds in the first half of that game. It's just that kind of effort and that kind of heart, and people could see that, and I think that really resonated well with fans. Fans who came and watched Tim Miles' teams play the last 2 years at Colorado State started coming back more and more often. They were like, this is fun. This is a good way to spend my entertainment dollar. I'm going to go watch this team more. And so they did start picking up the attendance and all. At the same time, there were still some, they had an 8 o'clock midweek game against New Mexico that should have sold the place out, and it only drew 4,400. Half the seats were empty. And so it's not all the way there, certainly, to what he's trying to accomplish and what he'd like to do and what Boyd Grant had done, but it's showing signs of going that direction again.
You're listening to Gaskins and Stevens, 93.7 The Ticket in Lincoln, theticketfm.com. We're chatting with Kelly Lyle, beat writer, Colorado State basketball, learning more about head coach Tim Miles, who could, or maybe is, a viable Nebraska basketball candidate and what he's all about. Let's go to something that is important but probably not as important to Nebraska basketball fans this time around in the coaching search, because this was an area where Nebraska's coach was great the last 6 years, and that's personality, likability, the ability to at least sell a program or himself to fans. Doc Sadler had all that. It just didn't translate with his players and performance. What about Tim Miles? I mean, what kind of gravitas does he bring?
He is probably one of the better coaches in the country in that regard. He cracks lots of jokes, and he sits at press conferences at the NCAA tournament and has the whole room cracking up with some of the one-liners he tells. He's quite comfortable, kind of a self-effacing sense of humor, and he really does promote his program. That's why people are going nuts about his sending out halftime tweets on Twitter through his sports information director. And that's something that a marketing guy that used to be here that's now at Arizona got him started on during his first or second year at Colorado State. It's something that just kind of stuck. He got into a contest with a Santa Clara coach over who could have the most Twitter followers. Tim Miles they had a reality TV show from the Mountain Sports Network that does Mountain West things come in and actually had pretty much almost unlimited access to the team and the players in the locker room and during practices, and they aired those. It was a weekly episode. They actually won a regional Emmy Award for that one of those years. He's very, very open about how he runs his program. He engages very well with fans, boosters, students. It doesn't matter. He's got students really more engaged in this program than they've been since those Boyd Grant days. Students are filling up their 2,500 seats a game pretty regularly, as long as school's in session. Their one problem, as he'll tell you, is they play a lot of games over the winter when school's not in session, and that always makes it a little tougher. But he is really, really good at that. I think 2 years ago, I think CBS put him on TV for a little bit on like CBS College Sports at the time for doing some commentary during the NCAA tournament, and he was a real hit with that. He is a guy that very easily could be in the marketing field or in the broadcasting business and do quite well if he weren't a coach.
Kelly, usually those type of guys are also pretty good on the recruiting front because they're just able to crack jokes with kids and really connect with guys. Can you describe him a little bit as a recruiter and just over the years what you've seen and heard from not necessarily just recruits, but people on the recruiting trails as far as his efforts out there?
I think you get what you see is what you get. I think he's pretty genuine with people, and they respect that. He's not going to try to tell you he's something that he isn't or that his program is something that it isn't. A lot of coaches, gloss over things and make every place seem like it's, a Final Four candidate every year. I think he's pretty straightforward, and that's part of the whole thing with the reality TV shows and things like that. He's like, I want people to see my program, warts and all, and then they can decide what they think of it. But I think people appreciate that genuineness. I know that a lot of the players that have signed here, that's been a big part of it, is that they believe that Tim Miles and his staff, they don't think they're selling them something that doesn't exist. They think they're very genuine and very honest and straightforward about what Colorado State has to offer, what this basketball program has to offer them, and what's going to be expected of them when they become part of it. And certainly that probably doesn't get them everybody. There's a lot of people that want to go for that pie in the sky, and we're going to hear all those grandiose projections of playing in Final Fours and stuff, whether they're true or not. But I think it does get him the kind of blue-collar type players he wants. It's a very effective way at getting the kind of players that he needs to build around, because he is so much based on they're going to work their tail off, and they're probably going to overachieve a little bit by most standards. You ask him and he'll say, I have a lot of talent. These guys didn't overachieve. They did what they should do. But you ask anybody else about their team this year, and they'll say this was a team that overachieved beyond belief. They had nobody taller than 6'6" on the floor and things like that, and they still won all these games. They had a 6- and 7-man rotation a lot of the year. So I think it's very effective at getting the kind of players he wants, and it's really just that genuineness. And I think he's a very believable person, and he really has never done anything to change that. In fact, I think that's partly why he won't talk about job searches and all, is because we all know when coaches start talking job searches, they pretty much have to lie if they're going to talk about it, because they'll all say they didn't interview or didn't talk to this person or didn't talk to this person or aren't interested, when we all know otherwise. I think he's more honest about it and just saying he's not going to say anything till there's something to announce.
Sure. how difficult is it to tell if he's the kind of guy that wants to stay there for a while, or if he is the kind of guy, if Nebraska, who's said they'll break the bank and is going to offer at least $1 million to $1.3 million, they're going to do somewhere in the range of $1 million to $1.5 million for a guy like Tim Miles. So, I mean, is this a guy that, I guess I could say, how tough is it to tell if he would leave or not?
You know, I think that for the right offer, he would leave. I don't think this year, I think it would be really hard to get him to leave right now because he has almost his entire team coming back for next year, and he's got 2 transfers that sat out, including Colton Iverson, who was a pretty good center when he was at Minnesota, that are going to be on the team next year and eligible to play. So I think he realistically believes he has a top 25 kind of team going into next season. Given what he's got. And so that's going to make it harder for anybody to lure him away this year because he's got what will certainly be his most talented team in the time he's been at Colorado State, and they're already here. That doesn't even matter how the new recruits coming in do. Doesn't matter who he might go out and get if he signs anybody in the spring. So I think that's going to make it a lot harder right now. I think a year from now, he's probably maybe a little more likely to see what's out there than he is right now. But again, he's got a family, he's got a wife, he's got 2 kids, and he's got to look out for himself. He'd be foolish not to at least see what's out there and what people might be willing to offer him.
And when it says the athletic director has not been asked for permission, that doesn't mean there hasn't been some contact going on between the Miles people and the Nebraska people. You would think.
All that stuff gets so they all have go-betweens,
Yes.
and this person talks to this person. But remember, this isn't an interview; we're just chatting, and
Yes.
Right.
So
they play those games, and the reality is permission's usually not asked until an offer is made.
Sure.
So how much stock you put in that, I don't know. They usually by the time an offer is made, that coach has usually accepted the job. I'm sure that with all these people that have pulled out of the Nebraska job and the Illinois job now with Shaka Smart the other day at VCU, I'll bet you anything, none of those people were truly offered the job. So technically there was nothing they pulled out of.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's all a game of semantics. Certainly they were in the mix, and had anybody believed they would say yes, then the offer would have been made. But nobody makes the offer until they know it's going to be accepted.
Do we know where Tim Miles has been the last few days? Have you been able to track that? Because I know Nebraska's talking to people in Atlanta.
Well, as I said, I spoke to him yesterday in his office. He was in Fort Collins all day long. I ran into him coming from a football press conference the day before. He was in Fort Collins. He was coming back into the parking lot from lunch, and I stopped and chatted with him for a few minutes. So at least during the day for the past 2 days, on both Tuesday and Wednesday, he was in Fort Collins, and yesterday I know he was in his office in and around campus pretty much the whole day. Beyond that, I'm not sure, who knows, and certainly Lincoln's not that far away, and it'd be pretty easy to slip off or for somebody to slip in here and chat with him.
Sure.
But I'd be surprised if he's had anything at that level yet with Nebraska or with anybody else. That doesn't mean it might not happen in the next few days or even be happening as we speak now, for all I know. But I'd be surprised if there's been anything prior to this like that.
Kelly Lyle, Fort Collins, Colorado. And Kelly, thank you so much for your information and insight about Tim Miles today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.